Hello there, everyone. It's Christy. How are you guys doing today? Sorry I left you without the music there for a little while. It's been a week and a weekend, and we'll just leave it at that. So I'm going to be honest. I am running a little bit behind this morning. As you guys probably, I'm going to try to keep the intro short and we'll get right into the business. But as by way of apology, because we're starting a few minutes late. It's I'm coming to the end of this EU project. I'm trying to get everything done by this Wednesday, which is not going to happen. I'm going to end up working on my holiday to get things done on time. Worked yesterday. It's just I got a lot on, and I'm trying to keep up. But sometimes I slip. Sometimes I'm not as perfect as I want to be, and so today I was 3 minutes late. I think you guys can probably deal. The other thing, though, is I haven't actually had a time to... all right, confession. I got into the shower, and the shower was so relaxing and so nice. I just didn't want to leave, and so for a while I didn't. I probably stayed in the shower for like an extra 10 minutes, longer than I should have. But I just needed a little 10-minute vacation. Yeah, not interested. And as a consequence, I'm still setting up a little bit, and I just thought I'd go live and you guys can see how boring it is when I set up the show. So the first thing I'll set up is the chats, and then we'll get going on the topic. So hello everyone, and sorry to the chat that I don't have you up and ready to go yet. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty important and serious topic, which is multifaceted. And the main topic... Thanks, AVG. I'm really happy that you guys always put that information out while I'm streaming. Damn it. Where was I? Pop-ups. This is the distraction of pop-ups. The way that if you're writing or something and a pop-up comes up for me. Hey, there's me. Yeah, see, now I'm thrown off again. Oh, I'm so tired, you guys. I'm so tired. The topic we're going to talk about is multifaceted. It's got a lot of elements to it in terms of mass shootings and why they're so harmful, obviously, and why we need to talk about them as a terrorist threat. However, that's not how they're being talked about. Absolutely not. There's definitely a white privilege when it comes to white terrorists, and I want to talk a little bit about that. In particular, I want to talk about the fact that I am very... angry, as angry as I get about internet stuff, that Sargon of Akkad has posted basically terrorist defenses on his channel. And he gave it time for a poo. All right. He is posting, basically denying that white terrorism exists, or white supremacy that is behind this white terrorism exists. And as I said on Twitter, imagine what would happen if there was a Islamic fundamentalist, jihadist, terrorist attack, and within 2 or 3 days, Sargon went online and declared that fundamentalist, radical Islam is a myth. It doesn't really exist. It's just a lie that people use to try to get power and to silence people. Because that's what he's done. That is what he's done. He has basically said the motivation behind white terrorism doesn't exist. It's a lie and it's a myth. And how is that not a defense of terrorism? How is it not protecting terrorists by denying that their deadly motivation even is a threat to us? So I want to do a couple things with this show. I even have show notes here that I've made. But one of the things I will have to do is make up another a space here, a room here. I'm just trying to find that sweet spot where my camera is weirdly angled. Like if I were straight on, I would be here. Maybe it's where I cut it. Maybe that's the problem in terms of my cropping my screen. But sorry, I'm a little bit flustered. Still a little bit all over the place today. I'm trying to focus, but it's hard. So I want to, before we get into the Sargon stuff, I want to just do a quick review of the whole week. Not everything, but just sort of a sum up. In particular, I want to just lay the groundwork that we have now 2, from my understanding, FBI investigations into terrorist activities that were linked to white supremacy. The first one isn't even in doubt. The El Paso mass killer, has admitted his motivation was targeting Mexicans. And we also need, as Americans, we really need to have a conversation, especially with bigoted and racist Americans, that not all people who come from South of Texas and California are Mexicans. There's a lot more to the Central and South America than Mexico. And it really, for me, when a person just calls all people of, like Hispanic, like whether it's European, Latin American descent or native descent, they just lump them all in as Mexicans. This is red flags or, red alerts for me. But anyway, so we have this guy who's openly said he targeted people because of their skin color. He targeted people because his perception of their ethnicity. Whether or not they were American citizens didn't matter. If you had any sort of Latinx, I think is the phrase if you want to be gender encompassing when it comes to that. He's a racist mass murderer motivated to protect white power. So that happened. We know that Trump went to these places and essentially tried to turn it into a political event. Unbelievably, he actually, sorry, I'm trying to set up my next room where I'm going to be talking. I'll just go over and we'll do a quick transition. Yeah, my camera's not showing up. Okay, that's what I'm trying to do while I'm talking to you guys. He took this trip, and we all know that Trump is not a consoler-in-chief. We know this about him. He seems to have no empathy. Like, he seems, in my opinion, and I'm not obviously a qualified anything when it comes to this. I can't say anything about anything professionally. So as a layperson, I'm going to say, I think he's a sociopath. I think the man is incapable of actually experiencing what we call the neurotypical range of emotions associated with the human experience. I don't think he has a capacity to be empathetic. I think he's somewhere on a spectrum of sociopathic behaviors and traits. Maybe based on his brain wiring, maybe based on some sort of conditioning. I don't know, but I don't think he's a fully functioning human being in terms of a full range of human emotional reactions. Because when they got to El Paso, and all of the people who had survived the mass murder, inspired by his language, inspired by his hateful rhetoric, under the umbrella of his racism, when those people didn't want to meet with him, his solution was to try to bring people back from the hospital to meet with him personally, including the child, the sort of infant/toddler, or whatever it was, of the parents who died protecting their kids. He did a grinning thumbs up photo op with an orphaned child, whose parents were killed because of his racist rhetoric. I've already to the point where I'm saying Trump is a fascist. The White House is occupied by a fascist. And this is the choice in 2020 isn't between Republicans and Democrats. It's between fascists and small d Democrats. People who believe in a republic. People who believe in the constitutional checks and balances and the separation of powers and rights based upon citizenship. Inclusivity based on citizenship. Not ethnic background, not migration status. Like whether or not you are a natural-born citizen or a naturalized citizen. If you can't commit to the idea of equality under the law, true equality, in other words, what white people get, then you're not really interested. And I also, before I go on, I know I've been doing a lot before Sargon. We're going to get to him. But I want to also bring two pieces of information, two facts together, right? And that is Christians who have a political agenda that involves stacking the courts to overturn abortion rights and contraception rights and gay rights, and to give legal protection to religious discrimination against people Christians don't want to serve, that then belief in authority, that submission to patriarchal authority, and a belief that there are powers in this world that are higher and more important than the secular government. Trump's base are basically fascist Christians. They're Christian theocrats. They see equality as whatever they want to experience. You know, sort of like in the same way that religious freedom in some conservative Islamic countries is the freedom from being offended by seeing, you know, like criticism of your God. That's pretty much where the fundy Christians are. They're not interested in the Constitution. They will pick their God or their perception of God over other people's rights. And this is why, and this is the whiteness, and they are protected by their whiteness. Their fascism and their disloyalty to the constitutional principles that protect us all are covered up by their whiteness. And they think that because they are white and they are Protestant and they are the chosen people of God and they owned the slaves before and they run this country, that they get to determine for everybody else what their freedoms are, because their God and their beliefs are more important than your civil rights and your equal treatment under the law. And that is the cover over which this white supremacy is operating. So this white privilege and this white evangelical theocratic subservience, obedience to a flawed authority if it gets them their political ends, that is the real threat going forward. All right, so that's said. I have a lot of things in my mind. I have a lot of things that I want to talk about. That was one of them. After Trump's dismal self-promotion tour using the victims of a mass slaughter he inspired as his own backdrop. Imagine that. We also had another display of white terrorist privilege, white male terrorist privilege here. So at this point, I've got the windows up. Hello, and I've kind of got these. I've got the window. I guess I could put that thing over here this way. So anyway, I'm still messing around a little bit with the interface, as you guys can see, and I'm not entirely sure how I want to make all of this work. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at this Time article. I'm going to swap back over to a different window here. Oh, that's a whole window. Sorry. I'm so tired, you guys. I'm sorry. All right. There we go. All right, let's have a look here at some of the news going on. And this is, if this isn't a symptom of white terrorist privilege, white privilege, basically. Let me look. It's in Time, and this armed. Oh, it was Missouri, Springfield. You guys probably saw this already. The guy. Walmart. That should be enough. All right. Imagine that there was an Islamic fundamentalist attack on American soil. Right. Imagine that some jihadist had walked into a public space armed with, body armor and guns, and proceeded to shoot up that place. Obviously, the entire country would freak out. There would be discussions about spying on mosques. There would be racial profiling up the ass, right? Everyone, Muslims, hate crime would go up, all of that. Everything would get worse. There's been, in comparison, what do white people do? What does my community do? What does some asshole in the white community do? He decides he's going to test his Second Amendment rights. He is going to see how far he can go as a white man, walking around with body armor and fully armed before he gets a shot or arrested. Right? So here's white privilege in action. This guy, 20-year-old idiot, put on body armor, armed himself to the teeth with weapons, and started walking toward a Walmart. And was eventually an off-duty firefighter who had a concealed carry permit, saw him, detained him, and then kept him under, I don't know, what do you want to call that? He had at gunpoint. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Kept him at gunpoint until the police arrived. If he had been black, if he had been from a Muslim, from Arabic country, if he had been any kind of brown, you think he would be alive? His whiteness protects him. And this is how, you can talk about the way that white terrorists like this, these white supremacist terrorists, will push the boundaries and push the boundaries. If we normalize seeing white men walking around armed to the teeth with body armor, that makes it that much easier for them to be out in public, doing that kind of stuff, getting away with it, not experiencing serious, the same ramifications as any other minority group, as a minority group would experience. And making it easier to get that much closer to your victims. If we normalize seeing white guys like this in body armor, walking around with an AR-15, they can just do it. What do you think the brown shirts did in Nazi Germany, in the rise of Hitler? They were out there normalizing violence against their targets. They were out there pushing the edges, pushing the boundaries, trying to make entire communities feel unsafe. That's what this guy wants to do. That's what all of these white supremacist terrorists want to do. They want to make American citizens afraid to be in their own country. That is intolerable. And the only reason we tolerate it is because it's not directed at the majority white population. This is where it comes down to, if this guy was not white, targeting white people, Mitch McConnell would have called the Senate back in session already. They'd already be passing bills. But because it's a white person targeting non-white people, threatening non-white people, making non-white people fearful of leaving their houses in what's supposed to be the greatest country in the world, then they win. That's what they want. And this is what we have to fight. This is what, as the white community, has to own. After a terrorist attack, there's a lot of conversations about, where are the Muslims who are condemning this? Where is the Muslim community condemning this? Where are the white people condemning this? Where is the white community when this kind of terrorism happens? Where is the white community calling out, this guy is an idiot, on Fox News? Where is the white community talking about having a responsibility to take care of our fellow citizens and to make sure people aren't feeling unsafe? If white people don't take white terrorism seriously, how can we criticize anyone when there's an Islamic terrorist attack? And right now, as an American, my family, I'm not worried about my family I'm not worried about myself living in Germany being the victim of a terrorist attack. I'm not worried about my family in Wisconsin being the victim of a foreign, led, organized terrorist attack. I am more worried about my family members being shot by a crazy-ass white guy, by some white guy who is mad about something, grieved about something, feeling like he needs to push boundaries. That's who I'm afraid of. But we're not racially profiling white guys, are we? No. Why would we? They run things. So, of course, they don't see the problem as part of the white community. This is why it's the same annoying thing I have when racists like Sargon will talk about black-on-black crime statistics. I would love to hear him recite white-on-white crime statistics. Why doesn't Sargon focus on the white community? Oh, because because then he's not being racist. He's being self-critical. And it's the same thing. The white majority, especially conservative white man, reactionary, status quo warriors, they don't want to talk about the collective problem. They're fine making Muslims a collective. They're fine taking one bad actor or some bad actors on an extreme and generalizing it to all Muslims and saying their culture is incompatible with the West. This is also incompatible with the West. This is incompatible with my democracy. This guy and the other white guys who are walking around trying to terrorize people based on their racist hatred, this is not part of white culture. This is something that we need to excise from white culture. And you know who has more, ability and is placed best to do that? Reactionary, status quo white warriors like Carl Benjamin, but instead he denies this is even a problem. All right, I keep saying I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm trying to go fast, but there's a lot to cover. Okay. And yeah, okay, we're just going to skip Moscow Mitch and the power of the NRA, because I don't have time to go over all of that. Tim Pool defending that piece of shit. Of course he is, because Tim Pool is a piece of shit who is also interested in preserving reactionary male power. What people don't want to talk, what white people don't want to talk about. And white people like me, this is what we need to talk about. We need to be talking about the white terrorism in our own community. We need to be talking about white crime. And not sort of like, you know, I mean, just reminded of the song by Little Dicky called White Crime, which is very funny, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the blind spot, the absolute blind spot to self-criticism within the white community. And if Tucker Carlson and white supremacists like Carl Benjamin continue to put out these messages, it's actually going to get people killed. And that is why I wanted to do this show. And this is why I am continually annoyed and will call out this content by Carl that is covering for white supremacists, playing down white supremacist terror and hate, and basically denying white supremacy exists in America. That is advancing terrorism. That is promoting terrorism. As much as if there was an entire video devoted to why Carl doing a video as to why a jihadist ideology is a myth too. If you don't name the problem, you can't fix it, and that is that's what Carl wants, is to not name, is want the problem to continue. Let's look a little bit at, I want to first look at an article about this issue from Frank Filgluzzi, who I see often on MSNBC, which is how I know his work. And we're going to look at Frankie White. Let's see if we can get there from there. I don't want to have to type Filgluzzi if I don't have to. Yep. So that's the one 22 hours ago. Yes, I found it. Excellent. Before we look at Carl's video, and I do want to take a quick look at it for a quick second. I mean, I do want to take a look at it, but before we look at Carl's video, I want to set up why it's so dangerous. And then we can go ahead and take a look at it. So here is Frank Filgluzzi. This guy, I believe, is he's some kind of intelligence officer. I don't know his exact title. It's probably at the end of the article. Does it say? No. Oh, that's not the end of the article. How far down do I have to go? He's some sort of intelligence expert. Sorry that I've forgotten his exact... they don't have it on here. But it's important here that we think about... I think it's important here that we listen to the people who have studied... here we go. Former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence and MSNBC News analyst. He writes, "It's time to rethink how we label terrorism. In congressional testimony 2 weeks ago, Christopher Wray, the Trump-appointed director of our FBI, explained that the threat of white nationalist violence appears to be rising. Between October and June, there were about 100 arrests of domestic terrorist suspects. And if that trend continues, the total for 2019 will exceed the previous year when there were about 120 cases." Wray added, quote, "We, the FBI, don't investigate ideology, no matter how repugnant. When it turns to violence, we're all over it," unquote. When does it turn to violence, as it did in El Paso? He goes on. Often that's all that's left for the FBI to do. Often all that's left for the FBI to do is clean up the carnage. But what if there was a better way to deter and even prevent deaths, not just investigate them after the fact? And this is what's important. And this is why Carl's content is important for the advancement of white terrorism in America, in my country, against my fellow citizens. Currently, the FBI lacks the laws and investigative tools necessary to tackle this threat from within. Following the mass shootings in El Paso, Gilroy, and Dayton, the FBI Agents Association, representing over 14,000 active and former special agents, called on Congress to make domestic terrorism a federal crime. Most Americans may assume that this is already the case, but oddly, while the U.S. government defines domestic terrorism under the law, it doesn't single it out as a specific crime. So domestic terrorists basically have affirmative action and protection against their terrorist acts in ways that other terrorists would not. The U.S. Patriot Act enacted after the morning. All right, hold on, let me have some coffee, guys. Mornings are tough. The U.S. Patriot Act enacted after the 9/11 terrorism attacks defined domestic terrorism, think white supremacy, violent militias, and the Oklahoma City bomber, as activities that appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the U.S. That seems fair, right? I mean, I think that's a reasonable, broad definition. He goes on, yet international terrorism, think Al-Qaeda and ISIS, limited to, quote, acts of terrorism transcending international boundaries, is a federal crime. Its domestic counterpart is not. So why isn't it? And is creating a separate and distinct new domestic terrorism law the solution? He goes on, hate-based, racially driven violence is nothing new in America. And oh my gosh, is that so true. I'm going to talk about my exploration of my own whiteness in a future video, but wow, white supremacy has always been violent, has always produced violence, and is still with us. Anyway, in fact, it is woven through the most disturbing fragments of our history, #facts. But this threat is now growing due to at least two driving factors. First, the internet makes it easier than ever for like-minded extremists to find, encourage, and abet one another. Online radicalization, which is what Carl is encouraging and is part of in his content when he's denying white supremacy, even exists. Filgluzzi goes on, in fact, the internet not only facilitates radicalization, it exponentially speeds up the path from hate to violence. Second, never has our nation had a president who served as a sort of radicalizer-in-chief, as I noted in a recent New York Times editorial predicting imminent racial violence. It matters not whether President Donald Trump is a genuine racist or merely playing one on TV, nor does it matter that Trump's angry and hate-filled rhetoric typically falls just short of calling for violence. As multiple examples show, the subtle distinction is lost on unstable minds seeking to belong to a cause greater than themselves. Importantly, the radicalization process that is playing out across our nation, including peer group affirmation, read Sargon of Akkad, and a compelling leader figure, looks eerily like the same process that pushes young extremist Muslims to violent jihad. Right? And this is what he is in that peer group affirmation part of promoting white terrorism. But this brings me back to the broader point about the legal definition of terrorism. If radicalization processes, the violent consequences and investigative skill sets needed to prevent them are virtually indistinguishable, why do we place domestic and international terrorism in two different buckets? And why are we talking about formalizing those buckets by creating a distinct law against domestic terrorism? If the El Paso murderer were Islamic, and his hateful online screed full of mentions of Allah, law enforcement would have had the legal resources needed to address the ideological motivation for his violence in an enhanced fashion. More importantly, though, had the terrorist been identified as a follower of Islam, it's possible the FBI could have prevented the horror of El Paso because the law for international terrorism allows counter-terrorism officials to monitor the racist and violence-enabling chat rooms where terrorists gather. Right? And this is what it comes down to. White terrorists in America are able to, basically they have affirmative action for being white and being domestic. They get a tactical terrorist advantage for practicing domestic terrorist, ideology and practices in comparison with their Islamic terrorist, counterparts. And when Carl says things like white supremacy doesn't exist and that denies the motivation for the white terrorism, all he is doing is perpetuating a shield for terrorists that basically make people resistant to dealing with white terrorists in the same way they're dealing with other types of terrorism. Continuing on. Many are now calling for the enactment of a new law that criminalizes domestic terror much like its international cousin, which means the FBI could monitor Chan boards. The FBI could monitor Gab. The FBI could monitor other domestic websites, or the activity of domestic residents and citizens on those websites under laws that would be, if we pass this revisions, similar to the kinds of surveillance and scrutiny that a potential and suspected radical Islamic terrorist would experience. I am for that, because we've seen the Chan boards, when places don't regulate themselves, they become havens for white supremacists. And there are plenty of white supremacists and white supremacist sympathizers and free speech extremists who are willing to tolerate anything on their platforms that they will create a place for these terrorists to gather and to connect and to radicalize each other and to basically, set the groundwork for an attack. And if we can't trust the market to regulate itself, then we need the government to do it. All right. So although that call is understandable, Filgluzzi goes on, it's also unnecessarily fraught with confusion and hand-wringing over free speech and privacy. I am a champion of free speech and privacy and have dedicated my 25-year FBI career to defending our right to say what we please. But, as the Supreme Court ruled in 1969 in Brandenburg versus Ohio, speech is protected under the First Amendment unless the speech is, quote, directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and is likely to incite or produce such action, unquote. We seem to fully understand this when it comes to extremist Muslims planning an attack. Yet we break out in a sweat when we suggest merely monitoring confirmed white supremacists on a social media site who pretend to be Christians and talk about shooting brown invaders. White privilege, white protection. We're basically saying that we're going to, and not we, but as Americans, we have treated white terrorists as privileged, as less, having a certain kind of safe space to operate and radicalize future terrorists, because we don't want to talk about the white problems in the white community. And we don't want to talk about white racism and own our racist institutions and our racist attitudes that we inherited when we were born into this country as a white-skinned person. And it's time to stop treating these white men with terrorist affirmative action by letting them get away with things that other people don't. Because when we do, Americans die. American citizens die. And our obligation is to protect their lives, not to protect the ability of racists to radicalize each other so they can kill people. That's just simple. I will always side with the American citizen over terrorists and white nationalists. Filgluzzi goes on, it's time to dismantle the artificial legal wall between domestic and international terrorism. Yes, yes, yes. Violent ideology that's headed toward violent action and facilitated by websites, blogs, chat rooms, Sargon of Akkad's content, or other forums needs to be addressed. He obviously didn't write that. I put that in there. I don't want to attribute those words to Frank Filgluzzi. That's my editorial comment. Needs to be addressed regardless of its origins in racism, hate, religion, or left or right extremism. Let's have one law that treats all violent ideologies the same and makes acting on those ideologies a crime. Yes, 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 yes. And what Carl wants to do is to privilege white supremacy and protect white supremacy and white people and white terrorist men who go out and do these mass shootings because he's a beneficiary of the terror they inspire. So he has an investment in the outcomes of a country where anyone who is not lily white gets harassed, gets verbally abused, gets physically intimidated by the white majority, gets pushed around, gets beaten up, is massacred. And those people feel afraid and they withdraw and they don't bring out their cultures and they don't feel safe being themselves and who they are as an American. And under that terror, think of like the French terror, right? Under that state of terror, everything is suppressed except for the white man, cis, patriarchal Christian power structure. That is what we trace all the way back to slavery. The first, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, the first form of identity politics developed and used to manipulate power in America is white identity politics. And every other form of identity politics has been in reaction to white identity politics suppressing, marginalizing, committing a genocide, enslaving, systematically repressing, segregating, confining to reservations, taking their land and then treating, like in Texas, and then treating people like outsiders. That all comes down to white identity politics and white supremacy. And until we deal with that and face that, we can't move on as a nation. We cannot be the greatest country on the earth, as politicians like to tell us, when we have actively a white supremacist attitude, power structure, and movement. We can aspire to be greater. We can aspire to be great, but to say that make America great again is to go back to segregation. Just make America great. And you do that by expanding rights. All right. So I think I've covered Frank Filgluzzi here. I was thinking this was going to be a short show. This is going to be a long ass show. I'm sorry, guys. I get talking and then I get off on a topic. All right. Before we move on a little bit, just in case you guys have things that you want to vent about, why don't we go ahead and have a quick look at the chat? And then when we come back, I want to take a look at some clips from Fair Use. We're going to look at 3 clips in particular. And I know it's a big lead up to Carl's comments, but it's all very important and necessary. I want to set this up in order to contrast what he says, the seriousness of the situation to what he says. Let me go ahead and look in the chat and see if you guys have anything else. Killing in the name of, yeah, some of those who work forces are the same who burn crosses. We have that problem too. There was a white supremacist who was outed in the Trump administration just this week. Right. The military too, big problem. It's not the greatest country in the world. Yeah, I mean, I know that's, it sounds weird to me now living in Europe, and it sounds, I think, a little bit, well, it's I think always sounded incredibly arrogant, if I'm honest, when America calls itself the greatest country in the world, when it has racial shootings, racially biased shootings, when it has the the legacy of slavery. I mean, if you are a white person, if you are a middle-class white person, it's really good with a lot of money and some financial security. It's great to be an American. Everybody else, there's a great Tech 9 line. I wish I could find it. Maybe I'll find it in the break. He's like, well, I'll find it and bring it on. But all right. So what are you guys saying in the John Locke, classical liberal, felt the Americans shouldn't be ruled by... Yeah, I mean, there's tons of races. All these white guys a lot of these white guys, of course, had some interesting and good ideas that we've benefited from, but it's also covering up how racist and sexist a lot of the people who came with these ideas were. And we have to be able to distinguish a good idea from a bad one. And this is my objection to the idea that to be an American, you have to try to be a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, preferably male. That is not what America is. That's not what American is. American is an idea, and you can be an American from anywhere. You can be and bring your culture and bring your history and bring who you are as a person and decide what you want your culture to be as an American. And we're talking about basically white anxiety, but we're going to get onto that. If the U.S. is the greatest country in the world is fucked. Yeah. There are things, I mean, to be fair, not to be fair, I love the ideals of my country. I love the aspiration that we have, because for those of us who actually believe in progress and making society better and moving forward away from bigotries and discrimination and expanding the quality of life enjoyed, the level of quality of life enjoyed by everybody based on their citizenship, which is the basis of our equality as Americans, That's what we should be seeing in terms of commonality. But yeah, if you're not in that group, if you're not in that privileged group, you're outside of access, the easy road to the top. Be too boring if everyone American was WASP. Agreed. Okay, so you say the ideas aren't unique to America. No offense. I agree that it's not like Americans invented that idea, but it is the case that because American identity was constructed out of immigrant identity, we do not, this is it. I think we should resist the idea to define Americans by geography, to define Americans by the historical European countries that our ancestors emigrated from. I think it's actually very important as Americans to define ourselves by those ideals rather than by those other types of forms of identity. So yes, you can have the idea of equality and under the law and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and be German. But the identity of being an American and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is kind of what being an American is, So going on. Pursuit of any utopias in the spirit of progress. Yeah, I agree. I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. When I was born, you could still use homophobic slurs. It was very widely accepted. People were marginalized. I didn't even know trans people existed. You had people who wore men and women's clothing. That was like the only category I was sort of aware of growing up. And I look at the change in my lifetime, and we've made a lot of progress. We still have a long ways to go, but it's that moving forward that I actually identify as being an American and expanding rights and expanding opportunity. All right, let's move on because hate speech isn't free speech. Yes. Some random geek, I just keep going and keep agreeing with you. So I think that's right. Again, in contrast to Carl, I want to talk again about the seriousness of this threat to Americans. And here again on MSNBC, we're going to listen here to Clint Watts. I'll check the volume on this. Oh, okay. This is MSNBC, so I should be able to, watch that. No problem. Good. I'm going to back this up a little bit. We're going to watch like the first couple minutes of this. Not the whole thing. Yep, that's muted. Great. I was wondering why there's no sound coming out. And how am I? Yeah, all right. There we go. I'll move you guys, your comments over here. And move this window there. So yeah, now we can watch that. This is Clint Watts. He's another security expert. And he's going to talk about white nationalism, white nationalist terrorism as a threat to American security. And I want to keep coming back to this in order to make, again, the contrast to Carl, and also maybe some people haven't had time to watch all of these, so I'm pulling out the ones that I think are particularly relevant to this discussion.
FBI special agent who has dealt with terrorism, Jim Kavanaugh, formerly of the ATF. Guys, this is an interesting evolution in the conversation to have the Texas Land Commissioner and Rod Rosenstein, Clint, saying what you two have been saying for some time, that there is something that matters about calling it what it is and prosecuting it as what it is. And
okay, then we're talking about why it's important to call white terrorism white terrorism. And this is, again, in direct contradiction to Carl repeating the Tucker Carlson lie that it's a myth, based on Carl's repeating Tucker Carlson's claim based on a personal appeal to personal experience or anecdotal fallacy. Right? Let's get the facts first.
Getting the public to understand that the danger of white nationalist domestic terrorism is the greatest threat most people face right now.
This is the most imminent threat. You are far more likely as an American to be killed by an angry white guy with an AR-15 than by any foreign terrorist. And yet people don't perceive that as a problem. They don't recognize that as a threat because they give white guys a pass. So we need to reframe the way we think about this in order to deal properly with the problem.
Clint,
That's right. And just think back just a few years ago, this issue going into the election, President Trump, many of his supporters really were hot on militant extremism, militant Islamic extremism. Remember, they were pushing the message, call it what it is, and they need to call this what it is today. It is very clear that we have a white nationalist terrorism problem in this country. We have seen repeated attacks. Now we're seeing attacks inspiring each other. This is a similar pattern, and if we don't actually call it what it is, if we don't put these pieces together, if we don't demonstrate that these attacks are related, we are just hindering the federal, state, and local law enforcement's ability to preempt the next attack. We need to give them the ability to do that, and to do that, we have to network them just like we did against other terrorist groups. We built these Joint Terrorism Task Force after 9/11, and we got much, much better year by year. Over the last decade, we have been preempting in a very significant way in terms of international terrorism. We saw a massive response against ISIS. If you remember back the summer of 2016, think about this, Ali, we were worried about the ISIS Ramadan wave of attacks that was happening around the world. Those casualty numbers look exactly like what we've seen in this country this week, just this week here, between Gilroy, El Paso, and now with Dayton. Very similar patterns emerging. You've seen the FBI do a really great job over the past year of preempting many of these domestic attacks, but they are under-resourced for this fight, and they are restricted in many ways from going at it the same way. They don't have the legislation which allows them to be more preemptive. They don't have the ability to go at this from the social media perspective, which Jim and I were talking about last night. You have to be in these communities, these online communities, trying to detect how these lone individuals are now networking online to radicalize each other, to plot, to plan, to distribute their manifestos and build their ideology, to set the next attack that's moving forward. They have to be in those spaces, and they have to be in those spaces in a big way.
All right, so what he's saying, I'm just going to distill this down to the points I want to make, draw your attention to and focus on. White terrorism is the biggest threat in terms of terrorist threats on American soil today. 2, we don't call white terrorism, white nationalist terrorism, by its proper name. And if we don't identify the problem and talk about it as a concept, then we can't really deal with it. 3, law enforcement doesn't have the same tool to go after domestic white nationalist terrorists the way it does foreign terrorists. 4, we need laws that will allow the FBI to monitor places of radicalization, like the Chan boards, like Gab, and honestly, content like Sargon of Akkad and his comment section. Right? And this is why it's so serious. Carl is helping perpetuate the lie, the deception that white nationalist terrorism isn't a problem, which means he's helping to promote terrorism. When you talk to people who study this, experts, Frank Filgluzzi, Clint Watts here, these are guys with together probably 50 years of experience, and their one job, regardless of party or policies or politics, their job is to keep people safe. And their goal, their aim is to keep Americans safe from these kinds of attacks. If you're not helping to solve the problem of white nationalism by terrorist, by talking about it, by being honest about it, by reporting the facts, then you're basically aiding it, in my opinion.
And we're just treating it completely different because we won't put a name on what it is. I think it's great that we have people coming out today and saying, hey, this is what it is. Rod Rosenstein coming out, he just left the job, right? He was in this. He was seeing what was happening on the inside. I really appreciate him coming out today and saying, let's get ahead of this. Let's treat it as we know what it is, which is white nationalist terrorism.
We need to stop the white privilege for white terrorists and call their terrorism what it is, and call the source of their inspiration what it is. White terrorists are inspired by white supremacy, just like Islamic terrorists are inspired by a radical form of Islam. And if you can't say that, you're giving them cover. If you deny it exists, you are promoting it. All right, so that's another. So we've had 2 terrorism experts or security experts here, explaining why it's not only important to name this phenomenon as white terrorism, but also to understand it as exactly the same type of terrorist framework that we have a good model for when it comes to how international terrorists are radicalized. It has all the same features of radicalization. And we lack not only the the language to appropriately talk about this, but the laws necessary to protect Americans from what is the greatest terrorist threat on American soil today. This is fucking serious, people. This is really serious. This is, and you want to talk about the problem with like refugees coming into Europe and doing all, these potential terrorist attack that, we're doing okay. America has had over 250 mass shootings this year. And white guys from America want to talk to me, want to lecture me about how I'm not safe in Europe because of Muslim immigration? You can't go to a Walmart. You can't go to a movie theater in America. You can't go to a club now and think about maybe. So you want to talk about who lives in a state of terror? You want to talk about who lives with the threat of terrorism hanging over them? A little bit white America, but a lot of the rest of America, all of the rest of America, live with this kind of terror. So don't lecture me about the problems we have in Europe when you can't deal with even saying the name white nationalist terrorism. And deal with that. White people need to talk about problems in the white community. White people need to talk about the radicalization of terrorists in our communities. Need to stop bringing up, racists need to stop bringing up black on black crime and talk about radicalization of white men in America to kill people because of their racism. That is the threat. Next video. We're going to look at, I know I get a little bit ranty on this, but and then we're going to go and look, I'm going to set all this up. So we've talked about Frank Filgluzzi, we've looked at Clint Watts, we're now going to look at 2 more clips, and then we're going to go back and all of this serious talk, life or death. And then we're going to go compare it to what Carl said and what he is promoting and what YouTube is profiting from. He has monetized his pro-supremacist cover content, and YouTube is taking his money as well. All right, so let's go to library, go back to history. I find it very annoying the way that they have this interface set up because they move things around, like the mobile app has history in a different place from the desktop, and it's very annoying. Okay. Got that? All right. I think this is the next one I wanted to look at. Yeah, I want to save Eddie Glaude, I think, for the end, because his speech is so powerful, it has to be the closer. So we're going to next look at this clip from
to which the president and
All In with Chris Hayes. And this is now, again, kind of setting us up toward the problem that we're going to look at with Carl's comments. And I'm just going to let Chris speak. So again, this is fair use. Obviously, we're not going to watch all 4 minutes of it. We're going to watch the first couple minutes. And then we're going to move on to another clip. All of this, again, is to set up a contrast with what Carl is going to say.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. President Trump spent the day shuttling between the sites of the 2 latest to stop what he called an invasion, echoing the exact same word the president himself has used repeatedly. This afternoon, Democratic presidential frontrunner Vice President
we're going to skip all this
without dealing with the consequences. It's Trump TV as well, specifically Tucker Carlson.
All right, here we go with the Tucker Carlson part, and Chris Hayes is going to rip him a new one. And I'm just going to let this part go because it's a good, counterpoint to the Sargon content. And someone wrote something in the, I thought Rape Tweet Guy got demonetized. Yeah, they remonetized him. If you go to the Thinkery, you can now join it and subscribe to it and pay monthly fees. So yeah, as soon as the media pressure got off, or the heat was taken off, they've remonetized his channel. Yeah.
Doing the exact same thing, though admittedly with a defter touch, night after night after night.
How precisely is diversity our strength? Ilhan Omar is living proof that the way we practice immigration has become dangerous to this country.
Racist.
Mexico has helped its citizens to break our federal laws. It's done that for years. That's what it looks like when a hostile foreign power interferes in your democracy. They don't buy Facebook ads that nobody sees. Why would they? They try to change the demographics of your country.
Racist.
What about us? What about our country?
Racist.
We're being invaded.
White people,
it's
right?
It's going to overwhelm our country
White
and change
people.
it completely and forever.
For white people.
And our viewers should know
white
that.
people.
It's not
White
at
people
all
should know that.
surprising that Carlson finds a very receptive audience among people like, for instance, the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer, whose founder, Carl Carlson, literally our greatest ally. He earns the praise of former KKK leader David Duke, who tweeted just today, "Tucker is right. White supremacy is a Zio media conspiracy theory."
This is who Carl is aligning himself with. David Duke. Right? I mean, to say that his channel isn't a white supremacist channel promoting white supremacy and at this point an inspiration for terrorism, helping to validate the worldview of that terrorists hold. How is YouTube monetizing this? I don't understand. I don't understand.
Tucker Carlson tells his overwhelmingly white audience the country is theirs, diversity is a threat, immigrants are invading, and then turns to say with a straight face, white supremacy? What white supremacy?
Yeah, he basically is a racist, a racist, a racist, a racist. He targets everyone in contrast to the white, like, oh, if you're not a white person, you can't really be an American. If you're a white person, you don't belong here. And then he doesn't see white supremacy? That's because he's a white supremacist. If you have a problem seeing white supremacy, it can mean, one, you don't actually understand the concept and how it works and what it's all about, or two, you actually are a white supremacist and you can't acknowledge your own the flaws of your own worldview.
If you were to assemble a list, a hierarchy of concerns, of problems this country faces, where would white supremacy be on the list?
Yeah, at the top of the cause of terrorism in the United States. That's where white supremacy is. The greatest threat you face as an American citizen comes from white supremacists on your own soil. So to say it's not a problem just demonstrates you're in on it. You're in on the white supremacist agenda if you're not calling it out. Because what you're saying is you don't take threats against Americans seriously unless they're white.
Right up there with...
Oh, probably white and conservative, because I'm sure that they would be happy for white liberals to be gunned down.
Probably. It's actually not a real problem in America.
It is not a problem for racist white people like Tucker Carlson because they aren't the targets of the hate. That's the difference. It's not saying, the reality is it's not that it's not a problem. It's not a problem for racists like him. So he's trying to defend it as not a problem for anyone else.
And membership of every white supremacist organization in this country, would they be able to fit inside a college football stadium?
Right. You don't have to be a member of an organization to be a white supremacist. Tucker Carlson is a white supremacist. He's not signed up to be a member of the KKK. He's just endorsed by their former leader. He's a white supremacist. If he wants to see a white supremacist, all he has to do is look in the mirror.
Carlson, like the president that he apologizes for, knows what he's doing. In this case, it's a clumsy little bait and switch in which he argues the only problem is a relatively small number of people that are members of a white supremacist organization. But as far as we know, the killer in El Paso wasn't a member of an organization, and the killer at the Pittsburgh synagogue wasn't a member of an organization, and the people throughout this country who get up in the faces of immigrants and people of color and scream at them to go back to their country, who berate people in gas stations because they're speaking Spanish, those people aren't members of organizations.
That's the point. You don't have to be a paid dues-paying member of the KKK to inspire terror in people. You just need to see two people who are minding their own business speaking Spanish, which is a European language, motherfucker. Spanish is a European language, like German, like French. So get the fuck over it. If you're that racist, you're being racist against a European language. You're being racist against white culture when you are targeting people for speaking Spanish. Idiots, right? But if you go up to people and start berating them because it annoys you to hear non-English, you're a white supremacist. It's none of your fucking business what language people are speaking if it doesn't involve you. Shut your mouth, entitled white person, and move along. And stop, if you claim to be a defender of European culture, Spanish is European. So think about that. I think this is pretty much... I just wanted to this little bit. I'm going to check a few more seconds to see if there's anything. French is best.
The problem isn't white supremacists as some distinct category that only includes David Duke. Mm-hmm. It is the ideology to which the president and Tucker Carlson himself subscribe.
Exactly. And this is why Sargon's content is so pro-terrorist and dangerous. He's denying the core motivation behind the terrorism. So he's basically giving cover to terrorists by denying that their motivation is somehow, racist and out to, that even exists as a motivation.
Which is that those people don't belong in this country, that it's not theirs, that diversity is a threat, that white people are being replaced. Now, I should say, in Carlson's defense, it's not an act. He really believes these things.
Because he's a white supremacist. If you want a
textbook definition of what overt white supremacy looks like, it's this.
How could you salvage Iraq at this point?
I don't, it's beyond our control. I mean, if somehow the Iraqis decided to behave like human beings or something. Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys.
Yeah. Tucker Carlson is a white supremacist, and Carl Sargon of Akkad, rape tweet guy, is right there along with him, defending him, standing for a white supremacist.
But I just have zero sympathy for them or their culture, a culture where people just don't use toilet paper or forks.
Yeah, subliterate, primitive monkeys. It's not people with swastika tattoos or white hoods that are the problem. It's the belief system that this is a country for white people and that white people are better than non-white people.
That's white supremacy. I know you can look up a definition. So for my purposes going forward, and I'll say this hopefully with every single episode when I talk about this, my definition of white supremacy is the attitude or activities or verbal endorsements associated with the goal of preserving, protecting, advancing, expanding power, wealth, status of white people to the exclusion of other groups. So if you want to see, for me, like the difference between whites, like white supremacy in practice, compare a panel on 5 different MSNBC shows in terms of diversity to Fox News. Fox News is about advancing white supremacy because they basically tokenize anyone who's not white, and all of the power is maintained, all of the white perspective is advanced. There's not a lot of room for anyone else unless they agree with advancing the white supremacist agenda. All right, so for me, white supremacy is about the supremacy of the white population in regards to economics, political power, whatever else. And if you think that whites deserve to be in power more, or you want to protect the power that whites hold because they're white, you're a white supremacist. So it's not that hard to, that's my definition.
An act of violence, of mass murder in support of that ideology, like the massacre in El Paso, creates real waves of fear throughout the country, far surpassing the one person who did it. In the wake of this, people are coming forward with their stories of harassment and intimidation and fear that is flowing from this racist ideology. One Latina immigrant telling the New York Times, "It feels like being hunted."
How can you think America is a great country when its own citizens feel hunted by white hate? And, the thing is, it's not like this is new. This is what as I'm exploring white supremacy and what it means to be white and white identity. What we have is not a new, suddenly, somehow this new form of white supremacy that's coming up. White supremacy, white terror, has always existed in America. And the only difference between these moments of high is when white people like us pay attention to it, but the rest of the time it's just under there. It's always been there. White supremacy, white violence against white racist violence against minority populations is part of our history, and it's just waves of when it comes up to the surface, as opposed to like not existing and then suddenly emerging. We have always been a white supremacist country. All of our policies are based in white supremacy. And when we get to the next bit, the next video, I'll talk about it, I guess, when we get there. But there was a statement in there that was so profound that it's actually completely transforming the way I think about things. But let's just finish up here with Chris. I just want to make the point. No American should feel like they can't be safe in our country because they might be killed by another American. And whether that's domestic abuse and whatever else, but especially when it comes to feeling like you are a target just walking around because of your skin color. And so many Americans feel like that, and we do nothing. We don't do enough. White America doesn't do enough to own that pain and to acknowledge it and to work on ways to make sure that when I leave the house as a white woman and I feel that same white protection that everyone has, it's not white protection. It's just citizenship protection. All right, let me keep going.
It's the ideology that is being pumped into the minds of the viewers of that show on Trump TV.
And Sargon of Akkad's channel.
Every night.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes.
All right, so then, guys, I'm going to need to take a break. We've been going, I didn't think I was going to go for an hour. I'm really sorry this is taking so much longer to set up and discuss than I thought, but I guess it's going to be the whole episode. I need to take a break. I'm out of coffee. But in the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to come back and watch the last video clip. And I've left it for the last because it has had on me the most emotional impact, and also conceptually has started me down a path of questioning the concept of whiteness itself that I want to talk about a little bit. And then we're going to contrast all of that to just Carl's comments and ask, why is YouTube profiting from the defense of white terrorism? All right. No complaints about the long setup? Okay, good. It is, I got started, I know, a little bit late because my life is chaos. 10 after. Let's just take 10 minutes. I just need to make some more coffee. And then we'll come right back. So, yeah, I think I just have to turn up the music. Gonna jam out, guys? Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Hi guys. Let's bring that music back. Alright, I don't actually know the words to that song, I just kind of make them up, by the way. I can kind of understand what he's saying, but not really. Alright, we're back. I don't know what time it is. I just decided to get going because life. I got things to do. So, just a real quick note before we start again. I saw that Wrong Speak Auditor said that your Welsh accent degenerates into an Indian accent. I can use, like, for some reason, I think I know why, a little bit. They're both very melodic in their, like, Welsh is a very melodic language, and when you speak to Indians, there's a lot of different languages in India, so I don't want to say we speak Indian. There's Hindi, there's Urdu, there's all kinds of languages, but they also have a very melodic way of speaking. They find it more interesting. Like, just a really normal tone like this is considered very boring. And so the melodic, I think it's the melody of the two languages. Okay. Continuing on. All right. So in the first hour, we've all been setting up as to basically why Carl Benjamin is promoting terrorism on his channel. He's defending terrorists on his channel. He is helping to cover up for white supremacy, and I don't understand why his content is monetized. And I will continue to talk about this until YouTube takes notice. Haircut's looking good. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I just had it trimmed up. I had gone for a while without a haircut because life, but thank you. Right. Let's go ahead and watch again. I know I've got reaction me small. Oh, I see. That one's super big. Oop, hold on. I'm just gonna muck about with the windows a little bit because I think I'm kind of super small relative to the other thing. So I'm gonna beef me up a bit. There you go. Oh, that didn't work at all. Okay, that's completely on the wrong side. Never mind. We'll just stick to what we had. The next video that we're gonna look at, it's a gut punch, guys. I'm not gonna lie about this. This next clip comes again from MSNBC, who's been doing amazing coverage. In this case, it's going to come from Nicole Wallace's show, Deadline. Did I click the right one? Deadline White House. Nicole Wallace has definitely been, holy cow, she's been on a journey. She did an entire episode, which was almost 100. It was 100% covering women first. Like, I think she's really becoming incredibly, way more woke than she was, I would bet, about this time 20 years ago. And this is, right, so a little bit, Eddie Glaude, I'm so sorry if I got his pronunciation of his last name wrong, but he is a Princeton University professor, as you can see. He has given this a lot of thought, and what he says in this segment is so important. And especially for me as a white person, I needed to hear this. He talks about something at the end I want to follow up with, but what I would just say for those of you who haven't heard this, just like listen with an open mind and an open heart to what he's about to say. Oh, wrong one.
You know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness.
This is what I'm talking about, yes. We go on and on about being the greatest country in the world while ignoring the fact that we've never properly done restitution and reparations to generations of people whose lives were stolen in order to create wealth for white America. So when we talk about America being the greatest country in the world, we're talking about the benefits white America accrued to itself by transfer of wealth via slavery, via land theft, via other forms of coercion and possession. And we're trying to tell ourselves we're great in order to make up for that history. That is how America became great. We don't want to talk about how we got... Remember that line in Thor Ragnarok? He wants to, talk about, he wants to take credit for all the gold, but now how he got it? That's what make America, the America being great. It's the same mentality. You want to praise the wealth, but you don't want to talk about how you made it.
Hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, We were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore.
Can we just tap into this a little bit? When I watch, last night, because I needed it as therapy, I watched Queer Eye. And I thought, this is it's for gay men, but from different backgrounds, different experiences, different personalities. And who is their show helping? Everybody. Men, women, cis, trans, able, disabled, people without mental health issues, people with mental health issues, veterans. Queer Eye has, it started off, you guys remember, Queer Eye for the straight guy. It was basically trying to get straight guys to acknowledge the humanity of gay men. It was trying to find some connection on a human level. See me as a human being. And how did it do it? I mean, it's kind of it's I don't want to do too much of a critique of Queer Eye for the straight guy, but it was here, let us be really nice to you and show you that we're human, so you like us. And that was the first season. Now with the reinvention of it, Queer Eye is becoming, it is obviously a conscious decision to be inclusive. The four guys and the producers on that show are making a concerted effort to not limit themselves to giving advice to men. Although I have to say, I liked a lot of the episodes that focused on men because the work that show does isn't on so much your haircut and your clothes. It's about understanding where your emotional pain is, how that pain is holding you back, how being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's actually strength, despite what toxic masculinity tells you. And showing your feelings and emotions and your vulnerabilities will make you a whole person. And whether you're a man or a cis man or a trans man, being a whole person, you will feel better about yourself. It's just, so it's not Queer Eye for the straight guy because they stopped limiting who they talk to, who they help, to straight guys. It's just Queer Eye. And so in this last season, there was a Mexican-American woman that they helped. There was a disabled man who was black that they helped. There was a military veteran who was white whom they helped. Old white guys. There was another woman, I think I remember an episode back, some black women. And they are deliberately showing America is not just about, guys. It's everyone. And I find that reality. I find that, hey, this is what America is. America is all of these people and all of these experiences and all of this background coming together, finding common ground on our identity, but appreciating our uniqueness and seeing people for who they are and acknowledging them for who they are and accepting them for who they are. That show is probably one of the most progressive shows out there. And if BreadTube and LeftTube want to know how to be better allies, y'all go watch Queer Eye, because they make the effort. They are conscious about who they reach out to, and they know the power of their show to humanize people, to, in an hour, to become friends with somebody that you will never meet. And they are expanding my pool of friends by their selection process and who they choose to associate with. That is what white nationalists and white supremacists fear. They fear the idea of not white people becoming normal Americans and becoming typical and taking up space that they think belongs to white people. If you feel more comfortable watching a movie from the 1950s than Queer Eye, you're probably a white supremacist. So I'm just going to come back from that and go back into the clip.
And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. Yeah. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, that 2-year-old had his bones broken by two parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
What else?
I just need to leave that for a moment because it's so powerful. His last statement just blew my mind. I didn't know how to place this. I didn't know what he meant by it. And if we can go back, I want him to say it again because it's actually really profound and incredibly important.
History that might set them free from being white.
Set me free from being white. Mind blown. What does that even mean? By the way, I'm going to transition now, so my screen will be a little bit bigger. That phrase has stuck with me since I watched this on the 5th of August. And I want to do a longer video. I'm not going to do it today because I don't have time and my thoughts aren't together. But I have been thinking a lot about whiteness, my identity as a white person, what it means to be white in America. And what so this is so powerful and so profound because we're so uneducated. We're not taught our history properly in as students of America. As high school students in America, we were not properly taught our history. And what he's saying here, when he talks about us, and it's very wonderful that he's speaking in a language I know very consciously. When he's saying that this problem is us, he's talking about white America. He's talking about America writ large because white supremacy is inherent in our history. And he talked, again, very subtle message about he didn't ever buy into the myths and the legends that he leaves this out, that white America tells itself. Why? Because sorry, that's kind of a crazy thing to leave his face on. I'll move it up.
Finally.
Okay, sorry, I had him frozen there. He doesn't buy into the myths and the legends that white Americans tell themselves to absolve themselves of responsibility for our white supremacist past. Because he and his family and his relatives and his ancestors are the ones who pay the price for the lies that white America tells itself. For looking the other way. For not taking seriously the concerns of fellow citizens. So, he's being inclusive in his language, but he's really not got that moral responsibility the way that I do and other white people do when we're talking to our fellow white Americans about these problems. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything new when I'm saying this, but as I considered his words, becoming freed from our whiteness, what I think he means by that is, my family my ancestors emigrated to the United States in the early 20th century. So I think around before the First World War time is my understanding from my genealogy. And they came from Poland. They didn't speak Polish. They were benefited from their whiteness. They got free land one of my great-great-great-great-grandparents, I don't know how many, 2 greats or whatever back, got a Homestead Act land. Free land that they handed out to white people to build their wealth, which we won't even do reparations for. But the American government was happy to steal Native American lands and hand them over to white people in order to build their wealth. So government doesn't work equally for white people and non-white people. Those immigrants came in to a white supremacist system. And they benefited from that white supremacist system and had their kids, and their kids were born into our white supremacist system and benefited from it, and so on and so on. So when it comes down to me now, and my role and my place in America, this is not, like, why would I be attached to preserving white supremacy? Okay, you're going to say, if people want to talk about white guilt and all the problems, like, if you aren't responsible personally for owning slaves and doing all those things that created the conditions that people are suffering under today, then why are you so afraid to talk about it? If you aren't personally responsible for the, creating the systems that are currently in place that systematically, normalize the murder of Black men and women, of brown people with police brutality and murder, and then the white police and the police are never held accountable, then why you have a hard time talking about it? If you didn't make these racist systems, then you have no reason to protect them. If you are not a racist, then you have no reason to not question why shootings are higher against African Americans, even when you control for crime in urban areas relative to their white counterparts. If you're not benefiting from racist systems, then why would you have a hard time talking about them? Why is it your responsibility? Because so here's why it's your responsibility. If you're an American, do you believe in the Constitution? Do you believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? If you want to understand, if you want those rights for and privileges for yourself and for everybody else, then you have to deal with racism. You have to deal with white supremacy violence. You have to deal with white supremacist terrorism. So I'm going to have a whole, video that I'm going to be making about kind of exploring whiteness and my whiteness and how I've really changed my mind and been thinking about these things quite deeply. But ultimately, freed from this notion of whiteness, because I have no responsibility to the white supremacist systems that were put in power before my ancestors came to America. I have no attachment to these, and in fact, I want to overturn them. So being freed from this trap of whiteness, where I don't need to carry the burden of slaveholders. Why would anyone in this century defend monuments to traitors? It's because they're buying into the notion of their own whiteness and taking on for themselves the burden of defending the indefensible. When you're born into this racist white system, there is an incentive there to protect it because you benefit from it, unless you recognize it for what it is and the harm that it does. So breaking down this notion of whiteness in America is actually, it's a really profound statement, and one that I think deserves more time and attention. All right, I'd argue that we white folk are responsible for dismantling the racist structures our forefathers built. Yeah, we benefit from them, others suffer from them, and it's on us to address that wrong. Yeah. I'm just saying that, white people seem to have a lot of defensiveness whenever we criticize institutions or systems as racist, as if it's in their best interest to protect these systems. It's not. Let it go. Let defending white supremacists go. Let go of the notion of being a white American. Just, understand your privilege, but understand also that you don't have to carry on this racist burden because white people in America in the past were awful, racist, terrible human beings. You don't have to defend that. All right. Let's then, now that we've compared two security experts, we looked at a rebuttal of Tucker Carlson, and we looked at a Princeton professor who is what did Tim Wise say, forgotten more over breakfast about racial discrimination and understanding of the context of racism in America than Carl will ever know. So let's just look, I think it's still in The Thinkery. I haven't checked Carl's channel in a while. But let's just compare that now to what he said. And if you watch the Happy Hour, you'll know that you already have seen this. Sorry that you're going to have the double one here. But this is the pro-terrorist. Right. This is the pro-terrorist defense of white nationalism. This is the conspiracy sort of theory level content being put out by a channel. See, here you can join right there. You want to ask me if whether or not this has been remonetized? Look at this. Get your terrorist defense content for only €5 a month. Wow. If you can put out pro-terrorist content on YouTube and make money, well, you just have to be white to do it. That's the difference. Carl's experiencing his white male privilege here by being able to get away with profiting from defensing, like a defense of terrorists, denying that terrorism has a motivation or a source in America. Well, let's hear his terrorist apologetics.
What the white supremacy problem in America is indeed a hoax perpetrated by the left, because what they're doing is defining Republicans as white supremacists. And so
we're defining people who use white supremacist rhetoric or who do not step up and speak out in opposition to white supremacist, racist rhetoric. And those people are Republicans. So once again, Carl, we're just going to go.
Notice they've gone from terrorist is inspired by Donald Trump's rhetoric, which we don't have any evidence for yet, and we have evidence to suggest he wasn't. But anyway,
again, he's apologizing for terrorists, and he is trying to disassociate a terrorist from his stated goals. The El Paso shooter said his goal was racist hate, and he used language exactly like Trump's. Yeah, the Republican Party is a white supremacist party. Yeah, definitely, because it's about preserving white power. You look around the Republican Party, and is there a lot of diversity? Are there even women in that party? No, it is a party of white supremacy, white male supremacy, white patriarchy in particular. The Republican Party is a poster child for what a white supremacist America would look like. Donald Trump's cabinet is a white supremacist cabinet. All his appointees, how many he's got, again, he does tokenism. He'll put a woman here and he'll put a black man there, but every other job, 99% of his jobs are going to be filled with conservative white guys just like him, because he's a white supremacist and he's a sexist. That is white supremacy.
They've gone from terrorists supported, inspired by Donald Trump's rhetoric. Therefore, anyone who supports Donald Trump is a racist.
Yes, I know that this is a really basic concept here, but if the president is out there saying racist things all the time and you still support them, you're racist. If even, let's say if you're not a racist, but you vote for someone that you know will enact racist policies, that's actually even worse than being a racist just in your own opinions. That is actually electing racism. That is promoting racist policy. So I don't understand how you can be not a racist and vote for someone who will institute racist policies. The only way you could vote for Donald Trump is if you don't care about racism. And you know what that makes you? A racist.
Because the racist likes Donald Trump. This is how they've connected one terrorist to essentially Trump's entire base.
And as we've seen from the actual experts who deal with intelligence, this is not how it works at all. Carl is talking out of his ass, and he's just giving cover to a terrorist.
And now they're everyone is a white supremacist now. It's
logical fallacy, over-exaggerating. Nobody said everybody is a terrorist. we are looking at specific groups and demographics. We're racially profiling people based on the groups to which they belong, right? And you're fine with it when it comes to racially profiling terrorists who come from Islamic countries. So why wouldn't the same logic apply when it comes to white men who have other certain characteristics, go on certain chan boards, use Gab, maybe watch your content as red flags for the kind of violence that we saw in El Paso?
Just everywhere. It's an obsession. I mean, look at AOC's Twitter feed.
It's an obsession. Yes, Carl, we're obsessed with protecting people from being murdered. And I know that, these were just brown people to you. They were, there were Mexicans in there, not just Americans. So obviously they're worth less? No, this isn't an exaggeration. This is life and death. And Carl sits on his fat ass in a country not impacted by this, with no education in his own history, let alone understanding the complexities and the breadth of white supremacist violence and death in the last 4 centuries of American history. And he wants to tell you that that white nationalism or white supremacy, the idea of white people being superior at all, is a myth. He's promoting terrorist ideology. He is giving cover to terrorist actions by denying their motivation as being legitimate. And he's calling it a conspiracy theory of brown people, and especially brown women, brown people, who are women of color, because this is exactly what a white supremacist would do. You are saying because of, what, and if you've seen this video, all he does is look at the number of times that she says white supremacy. Why would a person who is targeted by white supremacy not talk about it, Carl? She is targeted by white supremacy. She has experienced that anger and hate and the death threats. She has had her image throttled by young white men wearing Team Mitch McConnell shirts. Young Republicans throttling a cutout of a brown woman who expressed an opinion they didn't like. That is the kind of terrorism. That is a kind of intimidation. That's not free expression. And this is a free speech extremist will hide under free speech in order to justify advancing deadly ideologies. And when you dismiss white nationalist terrorism, you are helping the terrorist, Carl. You're helping the terrorists.
Just search for the term white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy.
Just going to point out, he's complaining about her mentions of white supremacy within days of there being the worst terrorist attack on American soil against Hispanics in history. And the person who was responsible is an admitted white supremacist. And he is outraged that she is talking about the motivations of a terrorist after a terrorist attack. How is this not defending terrorism? How is this not giving cover and telling that people, what Carl is saying is that the women of color and the people of color and the white liberals who complain about white supremacy and white nationalism, they're the problem. Not the white guy who went and murdered people and murdered Mexican citizens and murdered American citizens based on their ethnicity. He doesn't call that out at all. He's more concerned with a woman of color who was duly elected to her seat and actually represents people, unlike you fat-ass loser, who couldn't even break, 4% and destroy a political party. She has so much more legitimacy to speak on these issues on behalf of her constituents than you do sitting across the ocean in your pool of ignorance, flapping your fat-ass lips, making money defending terrorism. Tucker Carlson had to go on vacation from Fox News because he got so much blowback for calling this a myth. And YouTube is sharing the profits with you. I don't understand. This does not make sense to me. Your channel should be demonetized for this video alone. And I'm just going to say it. Your channel should be demonetized for promoting and defending white terrorism. That's it. It's time. All right, I know, don't tell me to calm down. We're talking about life and death matters here. Honestly, 22 people are dead. a baby is growing up without their parents. Hispanic Americans feel like they're walking around with a target on their back. They are experiencing terrorism. Carl isn't, he's got the luxury of his skin color to protect him from the violence he tells us is a hoax. So no, if we're not going to get mad and angry about people being murdered out of senseless hate, when are you going to get mad? Because Andy Nagao had a milkshake thrown on him and got hit in the head? He's going to get how many hundreds of thousands of dollars because of having a person who is allegedly Antifa knock him in the face a little bit? But 22 people dead, I am not supposed to get angry? This is the problem of white supremacists, white terrorists, this reactionary tone policing, emotion policing, language policing. Whenever brown people are dying, whenever women are dying, it's not important. When a fat-ass white guy gets a milkshake thrown on him, you all freak out and fall over and clutch your pearls. You don't value non-white lives as much as you value white lives. And that is at the heart of white supremacy. This is what is at the core of Carl's white supremacy, is that ultimately he values white people more than he values brown people. And that is what is killing American citizens. And if you don't care about it enough to stop it, then you're part of the problem. If it's too uncomfortable for you to talk about it, you're part of the problem. Right? If you get personally upset when other people mention racism because it makes you as a white person feel uncomfortable, you have to remember that they go outside their house and are fearful of white people who will beat them or insult them or intimidate them. So your feelings of discomfort in one conversation about race is nothing compared to what people of color in America experience every day just leaving their house. So I'm tired of white people playing the victim card. I'm tired of I'm the vulnerable minority because you feel slightly uncomfortable taking responsibility for a racist system you benefit from. If you want America to be the greatest nation in the world, if you want to live up to the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then you have to start caring when your fellow citizens are gunned down. And it has to matter no matter what reason is given. And if the reasons make us uncomfortable, then that discomfort is nothing compared to the lives that are saved when we dismantle white supremacy inside people's hearts and inside institutions. There is no other way to be freed from this conversation and these problems than to deal with them. For white America to talk about the problems of radicalization in the white community and what is going on with hate in the white community that is producing murderers. That is a conversation we need to be having. And if we're not, people are going to die. Okay, continuing on.
Just constant. Just it's all over the place.
Yes.
She's constantly talking about it.
She's constantly talking about it when people have been killed.
Says, well, look, this is actually a myth that's just being perpetuated. He's completely correct. It's total fake news.
Again, Carl is an ignoramus. He's seriously a dumbass. Dumbass talking. He doesn't... So, whites, again, I'm going to say this again. The first form of identity politics created and played for political advantage in American history was white identity politics. Every other form of identity has been constructed in reaction to white man's identity politics. White patriarchy, basically. We have to kind of bind that up together. Because even though white women benefit from white supremacy, there's also the patriarchy level too. Right? And you have to be a complete ignoramus to not understand how white supremacy structured all of the economic relations, moving from the foundations of the country. Before the country was a country, white supremacy was built into it, its economics. And then that was extended into its politics. And all of these were a reflection of the social. So you might as well just I don't even know, like, deny freedom of speech exists. I mean, that's actually even a later concept. But the idea that white supremacy is a hoax is only something that can be advanced by people who are white supremacists themselves, who are looking to mitigate the damage of critique leveled at white nationalists and white supremacists, and because they don't want to change their ideology.
But by the way that it's being reported, you would think that white supremacists have taken over the Republican Party?
Yeah, they have. I mean, the only reason you would think that they have it is that you don't understand what a white supremacist is, or white supremacy is. And of course, Carl doesn't, because he's an ignorant bigot, racist, and he's the defender of terrorists. He defended the Christchurch shooter for having good points. He's defended Elliot Rodger. Carl is all about defending white mass murderers. It's what he does on the regular. Every time we see this, we see him explaining why white men aren't really to blame and why racism isn't really a problem. That these guys have valid points because he's a fucking racist. So the Republicans are a party of white supremacy. Look at their efforts to gerrymander. Look at their efforts on voter suppression. They target the black community to stop them from voting. They try to eliminate souls to the polls because they know that that's where a big source of turnout is. And this isn't new. This tactic was used by the Democrats in the 1860s after the Civil War, after the enfranchisement of black men. This is just history repeating itself. The only problem is the story. We're doing the same play, but it's new actors, and we don't know that these lines have been spoken 1,000 times yet because we're not aware of our history. We're not taught our history properly. And Carl's certainly not qualified to speak to this. So yes, the Republican Party is just adopted a series of white supremacist policies that get passed from party to party over time. Democrats did it for a while, and then they decided the party itself changed who was part of it and changed their outlook. And the Republicans came in, they took over that white supremacist agenda. And they took over that white supremacist policy tactics. And that's what they're doing. So yes, the Republican Party is a party of white supremacy. There's a reason why people of color are a minority or are leaving. It's a patriarchal party. There's a reason why there are very few women. There's a reason why the Republican Party doesn't look like America, but it looks like the Confederacy. You know why? Because it's a party that is underlying at its core, it is committed to white supremacy. And all the people who in the Republican Party who didn't know that, all of the dupes who for the last 40 years thought it was about small government and, limited government and empowerment, which I don't know how you bought that line of shit for so long when it was pretty obvious to anyone looking that their long-term plan was a white supremacist state. But those people have left the Republican Party. You know who's left in Trump's, who the Trumpists are left? They're all white fascists. Or they're getting paid to do, they have some benefit from it. But at this point, yeah, you might as well call them Trumpists. And not Republicans, but Trumpists. Trumpists are white supremacists. They are.
But they haven't. They actively haven't. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is a lie, said Carlson, who's routinely given airtime to white nationalist conspiracy theories and talking points.
Yeah. Tucker Carlson is a white nationalist. He's a white supremacist. And you're citing a white supremacist. You might as well cite David Duke. That white nationalism doesn't exist. It's just like David Duke was praising Tucker Carlson. You're in the same blood and soil chanting, neo-Nazi, Charlottesville, tiki torch carrying. You might as well have marched with these people, Carl, because you're spouting the exact same thing. You're citing a white supremacist as your evidence for the non-existence of white supremacy. I don't know how this content is monetized.
It's actually not a real problem in America. I love that they spliced this in. Nice editorializing. This is a hoax, just like the Russia hoax. It's conspiracy.
If you think the Russian thing is a hoax, then you basically you can't. All the intelligence from up and down, the idea, there's a group of people who benefit from the Russian hoax narrative, and that's Trump white supremacists.
Theory used to divide the country and keep a hold on power. That's exactly what's going on. It's really like the new form of McCarthyism.
Carl doesn't understand McCarthyism either. for a real quick history lesson, McCarthyism was anti-communism. And McCarthy, sadly, was a senator from the state of Wisconsin. I should go piss on his grave sometime. But he organized an entire lie around the idea that there were communists in various parts of the government. He used his position of power in the House or in the Senate, Senator McCarthy, to basically harass people that he ideologically disagreed with. And there was nothing underneath. It was just a series of accusations. This isn't anything like McCarthyism. White supremacy is bound up with American history. And again, Carl is too ignorant and racist to understand this accurately or to care enough to be accurate about it. But it's not McCarthyism. It's nothing like McCarthyism. Calling white supremacists is not McCarthyism. It's coming to grips, and this goes back to the videos we watched first. What if in the article, Frank Filgluzzi and Clint Watts both said, the most important thing first is to name this, is to call it what it is to be accurate. It is white terrorism. It is white nationalist terrorism. It is white supremacy terrorism. If you can't take that first step, you can't deal with the problem. And what is Carl's goal here? His goal is to deny the problem exists. His goal is directly in contradiction with the things that can be done to keep Americans safe. He is putting out the same kind of information that an active radicalizer for white supremacy would put out in order to protect and expand and continue radicalizing young white men into violence. That is what Carl is doing.
Everything is white supremacy.
White supremacy is white supremacy. And using logical fallacies like this is his way of defending terrorism.
I showed it. There was the MSNBC host saying, well, all of these numbers are dog whistles to Nazis.
Yeah, I'll have to go back. I'm sure he's misrepresented that and misunderstood it because Carl isn't smart enough to actually properly understand things unless it's explained to him in small words.
Total nonsense. Non-stop.
So I don't think we really need to. We've gotten to the sort of general gist. I don't think it's really worth going through all of this because what it comes down to is that, and I'm going to say it, the Thinkery channel is a place that defends and protects white supremacist ideology and white supremacist terrorism. There, I said it. My free speech. And I don't know how YouTube can monetize terrorist defense, terrorist protecting, terrorist enabling content. And that's going to be the end of the show. All right. I think, I know that we didn't spend that much time on Carl in the end. But he isn't really what was this, debunking him was what this show was about. And I've shown you two security experts on intelligence who both agree that what we need to do in America is call white terrorism what it is to understand accurately this threat from white supremacists and the white supremacist ideology, and to create laws that will enable our security departments and institutions, intelligence, to monitor the Chan boards, to monitor Gab, to monitor the places like Sargon's Discord, where white supremacists gather and plan and radicalize. Because that's what we would do if it was Islamic terrorist threat. And we need to protect Americans by extending those legal tools, those resources, and the priority for investigation and dismantling and uncovering and exposing white supremacists in America on white boards like Chan boards and your comment section, Carl, and your Discord, in order to make sure that Americans aren't murdered because of the hate you tolerate and spread. All right. That's me. Well, I'm not done on this, but I'm done for this episode. I've mentioned this a couple times. I do want to sort of say it formally, but let me just finish off some of my coffee here. I have been doing a lot of thinking and watching and reflecting and putting ideas together about this notion of whiteness and my whiteness and my experience of whiteness and how my experience of whiteness framed and informed my understanding and willingness to talk about issues of racial justice for the first 40 plus years of my life. But it's something that I think I'm probably going to talk about it a lot, but I'll put it together in a more formal video where I'm already sketching it out a little bit, but I do think that I'm seeing it's important to use my white privilege, my position as a white person, to reflect back on the racist systems that I have benefited from, that exist, to talk about the process of decoupling, my sense of whiteness from these things that were created by white supremacists that I benefit from, and how I can try to dismantle them, all of this stuff. I really, like I said, that whole idea of leaving behind, or this notion of my attachment to my whiteness, or myself as understanding it as a white American. We'll see where it goes. Other updates for the channel. I'm going on holiday. I'm leaving on Wednesday. For my vacation. I have a lot of work to do on Monday and Tuesday before then. Don't know if I'll get in a happy hour, but if at all possible, I'll try to keep up with the weekend show while I'm away at the usual time. I'm just going up to East Anglia. I'm going to be tooling around. I want to go to maybe Bury St. Edmunds, maybe go to Ely, see some friends in Colchester, maybe go down to Wivenhoe. They were my old stomping grounds at my university, and go to Bengal Spice, which is a great Indian restaurant in the village where I used to live in Wivenhoe, and go maybe have a doll from Bengal Spice in Wivenhoe. A lot of things. And so next time we talk, I'll probably be in a different location. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being patient with me as I built up all of this information, and really at the end just crashed down on Carl within about 5 minutes. So thank you guys for coming and staying live. I'm sorry I didn't interact more with the chat, but I kind of need to just stay focused this time. We'll do more interaction maybe in the next one. And I think that's pretty much all I have left to say. So all that's left to say then is that I've been Christy. You guys have been awesome. I appreciate your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in a future video. So have a great Sunday, morning, noon, or night, wherever it is, whenever it is, where you are. And until next time, from me, well, see you later. Bye.